Good evening, friends. Take a slow breath with me. In through the nose, soft and quiet, and out through the mouth, slower still. Feel the room settle around you. Maybe there's a faint hum from a lamp, or the distant rhythm of night outside your window. Let it all fade. Tonight, we're going to drift far away, to a time when silence wasn't just peaceful, it was law. Dim your lights if you haven't already. Pull your blanket up to your shoulders. Feel the warmth gather under your chin, and let the world shrink to just this moment. If this calm journey helps you unwind, tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right, of course. Now close your eyes halfway, and picture it. A medieval town sleeping under a moon as pale as milk. The year is 1285, in a quiet English village not far from Canterbury. The air is cool and smells faintly of damp straw and wood smoke. The streets twist like roots, uneven and narrow, their cobbles shining with the day's last drizzle. Lanterns sway above doorways, their little flames clinging stubbornly to life. And then, as the church bell tolls 9 times, something curious happens. A sound, a long, low ring rolls over the rooftops. It's called the curfew bell, from the old French couvre-feu, meaning, cover your fire. At that signal, every hearth in town must be smothered, every light dimmed. No one is to walk the streets. No laughter, no footsteps, no song. The law of silence begins. Imagine that for a moment. It's late, your stew pot's still warm, but you must cover the coals with ash before bed. The fire that kept your family alive all day must now sleep too. Guards patrol the streets, watching for a flicker of forbidden flame. Anyone caught wandering without cause could be fined, or worse, tossed into the stocks come morning. It sounds strict, doesn't it? A rule against staying up late. But here's the strange part, it made perfect sense. In the dense, wooden towns of medieval Europe, fire was the greatest fear. A single spark could leap from one thatched roof to another and swallow an entire village before dawn. By forcing everyone to cover the fire, the curfew bell saved more lives than any wall or guard ever could. So, while the rule seems odd now, in its own way it was a kind of bedtime lullaby. The bell told mothers to tuck in their children, tavern keepers to pour their last mugs, and blacksmiths to cool their forges. The night belonged not to people but to rest. Picture the quiet that followed, the gentle creak of shutters, the whisper of wind over the eaves. Somewhere a dog gives a single sleepy bark, then curls tighter. The last sound before true silence is the echo of boots. Perhaps a town watchman, cloak brushing stone, lantern in hand, humming to keep himself awake. And as the world sleeps, time itself seems to slow. The stars shine as they have for 1,000 years, distant and unbothered. The moonlight spills through the cracks of wooden shutters and finds faces soft in dreams. In this stillness, there is safety, community, and a rare kind of peace. The Lord rises, tapping his goblet with a silver knife. The sound rings like glass and hushes the room. He speaks a few words, a blessing, perhaps, or a reminder of tomorrow's hunt. Then he lifts his hand, and as though choreographed, everyone stands. Chairs scrape, candles flicker, and the night folds in. You can almost feel the warmth on your face, smell the last trace of cinnamon and smoke. There's comfort in that, the end of a shared meal, the glow of rules that somehow turned chaos into communion. But the strangest laws weren't always written in ink or spoken aloud. Some were carved in habit, others whispered between generations. And one, hidden deep in the countryside, governed something most unexpected, the way you could live with your animals. A rule that blurred the line between home and barn, man and beast, until it became almost poetic. The feast is over. The laughter fades behind us, and the sound of hooves and cart wheels replaces the echo of music. The road turns narrow, winding between hedges dusted with frost. Ahead, a thatched farmhouse waits, smoke drifting from the chimney, a lantern swaying by the door. The air smells of damp earth, apples, and something faintly sweet, hay warmed by animal breath. This is the other half of the medieval world, quieter, slower, ruled not by kings or courtiers, but by rhythm and routine. When dawn came early and candles were precious, People didn't just live near their animals. They lived with them, literally. In many villages, families shared their one-room homes with goats, chickens, and sometimes even cows. And there were laws about that too. Not laws of punishment or crime, but of order, small, practical decrees meant to keep peace between creature and caretaker. It's strange to imagine, isn't it? Waking to the sound of your cow shifting beside the hearth, your rooster perched near the rafters, the faint bleat of a sheep as it dreams in the straw. But in the chill of a 13th century winter, warmth was a matter of survival. The animals' breath kept the air soft, the heat of their bodies pushing back the cold that seeped through stone and wood. Yet there was more to it than comfort. Some local ordinances, like those recorded in manorial rolls from Yorkshire and Kent, set rules for exactly how animals could share human space. Cows had to be tethered. Pigs had to be muzzled after dusk. Hens could not roost on the rafters where they might soil stored grain. Even kindness had structure in the medieval mind. Order meant safety, and safety meant survival. Imagine a small cottage at the edge of a forest. The walls are made of wattle and daub, straw and mud pressed between wooden beams. Inside, a woman stirs a pot over a low fire. A goat shifts in the corner, its hooves clacking softly against the floor. A child sits near the hearth, tracing shapes in the ash with a stick. The mother hums under her breath, a tune that might have been passed down from her grandmother. Outside, the wind carries the faint scent of rain. It's all so ordinary, yet bound by invisible laws that shaped daily life like gravity. You can almost hear it, the soft chorus of animals breathing, the slow drip of water from the roof, the muted crackle of logs. There's something deeply peaceful about it. The rhythm of coexistence. Each creature knew its place, each family knew its role, and somehow, through all the mud and hardship, it worked. And of course, not everyone followed the rules perfectly. There's an old folktale from Devon about a farmer who let his pig roam free, ignoring the steward's warnings. One night, the creature rooted through a neighbor's garden, knocking over the fence and frightening a milkmaid. The next morning, the man was fined 1 penny and forced to kiss the steward's boot. A punishment so humiliating that he tied a bell to the pig's neck from then on, so everyone could hear its mischief coming. But humans are curious creatures, aren't we? Even in the quietest towns, someone always breaks the rule. There's the baker who forgets his dough and sneaks out to knead by moonlight, hoping no one hears. There's the young lovers whispering in the alley, hearts louder than the church bell. And there's the old healer, eyes sharp as an owl's, tending to a fever long after curfew, her little candle wrapped in cloth to hide the glow. It's easy to smile at such things, but behind the humor lies something gentle, the belief that life was shared, that even mischief could be folded into the rules of community. No one thought it strange to eat beside a cow or sleep beneath the same roof as a hen. They were part of the family's warmth, its noise, its scent, its soul. And maybe that's why so many of those old homes were built the same way, longhouses they were called, where humans lived at one end and livestock at the other, separated only by a low partition. The animal's body heat rose through the planks, a natural heater that kept frost from creeping across the floor. The law didn't force people to care for animals. It merely reminded them that harmony needed structure, even in love. Now, let the night settle around that little cottage. The fire burns low, casting orange light on the goat's flank. The woman stirs the pot one last time, sets the ladle aside, and whispers a prayer. Outside, the rain has begun to fall, gentle and rhythmic against the roof. Inside, the child yawns, the goat shifts, and the world feels smaller, safer, softer. Strange laws, yes, but each one a thread, weaving safety from chaos, warmth from wildness, order from chance. The colors of kings, the sounds of cities, the manners of feasts, the rules of barns, all reflections of the same truth. Survival was a shared art. And as the rain fades into silence, a new kind of law takes shape, one not of land or sound, but of the heart. A law that decided who could love whom and when and how. In the next chapter, we'll wander through those tender boundaries, into stories of medieval marriage, scandal, and vows that carried the weight of kingdoms. So, take another slow breath. Feel the warmth of that cottage linger a little longer before we move on. The fire's glow will stay with us, even as the bells of another village begin to ring in the distance. The rain has passed, and the dawn glows faint and pearly over the hills. The cottages are still, smoke curling from chimneys in thin, ghostly ribbons. The world feels washed clean. But beyond those sleepy fields, the church bells begin to ring slow, solemn, calling not for worship this time, but for witness. Today, a marriage will take place. Now imagine this. A stone church, small and cool, its walls breathing out centuries of incense. The floor is uneven, polished smooth by the steps of countless pilgrims. Sunlight filters through colored glass and paints the flagstones red and gold. At the front, a priest stands with his book open, its pages curled with age. Two people kneel before him, not nobles, not peasants, just people, and between them lies a question older than law itself. In medieval Europe, marriage was not simply a choice of the heart. It was a contract, a spiritual and social bond that carried weight beyond affection. And like everything else in those times, it came with rules, many of them strange, yet perfectly sensible when seen through the lens of survival and faith. For one, a marriage wasn't official unless it was public. Love could be whispered in shadows, but vows had to be spoken in daylight, before witnesses. This wasn't about spectacle, it was protection. A public promise meant accountability. No man could deny his wife, no woman her husband. The church, ever the keeper of order, recorded names and dates like anchors against the chaos of rumor. The night bell, meant to hush the world, becomes a backdrop to these small rebellions. Yet even those who broke the law understood why it existed. They didn't resent it. They worked around it like children tiptoeing after bedtime. The curfew was less a punishment, more a reminder that night belonged to rest, and that rest, in a world of endless toil, was sacred. And yet, even here, life found loopholes. Not every couple could afford a church wedding. Some made their vows at the church door, literally standing outside, hands clasped, words exchanged beneath the eyes of God and passerby alike. Others bound themselves in handfasting, a kind of temporary marriage, 1 year and 1 day to test compatibility. If love survived that span, the bond could be blessed. If not, the pair went their separate ways, no harm done. There's something almost tender in that, isn't there? Love trial-sized. A year to learn the shape of someone's silence, the weight of their laughter. A year to find out if two hearts could live in rhythm, not just in longing. Picture a quiet village wedding now. The bride wears a simple gown of linen, her hair braided with wildflowers. The groom stands nervously beside her, clutching a small token, maybe a carved wooden ring, maybe just a ribbon tied around her wrist. The priest clears his throat. Outside, sparrows hop along the church roof, and a cow lowing in the distance sounds like part of the hymn. Wilt thou take her? The priest begins, his voice echoing softly, and as the couple speak their vows, something shifts. Not just in their hearts, but in the air itself. Promise becomes law not through force, but through faith. But love, as we know, is rarely simple. The same medieval world that cherished vows also feared passion ungoverned. There were laws against secret marriages, clandestina dispensatio, and harsh punishments for those who dared to love across class or creed. A lord could not marry a commoner without the king's consent. A widow could not remarry without paying a fine to her feudal lord, who technically owned her dowry. Even affection was taxed. And yet, the human heart is stubborn. There are stories, quiet, half-whispered through time, of lovers who found ways around these rules. A knight's daughter who fled with a blacksmith's son. Their vows spoken beneath a willow at dusk. A widow who forgot to pay her fine and married her late husband's friend by moonlight. Each tale, in its own way, was rebellion draped in tenderness. Close your eyes for a moment and feel that, the pulse of defiance wrapped inside devotion. The sense that even in an age of order, love wrote its own rules. The church bell tolls again. The couple at the altar rise, faces flushed, hands trembling. Outside, the villagers cheer softly. Someone throws a handful of oats, a symbol of fertility, and laughter ripples through the crowd. For a brief moment, law and joy become one. As the bells fade, the priest closes his book. The candles burn low. A new household is born, bound by faith, by promise, and by parchment. But in some corners of the medieval world, the laws of love went even further, not to bind, but to break. There were rules for annulment, for penance, for heartbreak itself. The strange belief that a failed marriage could be healed by distance, prayer, and even pilgrimage. So when the bell rang each evening, the town obeyed. Fires went out. The air cooled. The dark thickened into something almost alive, stretching across rooftops and fields like a great velvet cloak. It was law, yes, but also lullaby, a daily invitation to surrender. And so, as this wedding feast begins, the ale flowing, the bread breaking, the fiddles rising, let's quietly follow one traveler who chose a different kind of vow. Not to marry, but to wander. A pilgrim of love, seeking absolution not from sin, but from sorrow. The morning after the wedding, the village hums with laughter and hangovers. The smell of bread and ale drifts through the lanes, mingling with the lowing of cows and the chatter of hens. But one man walks alone down the path leading away from it all. His cloak is plain, his pack small. His name is lost to time, we'll call him Thomas. He walks not for trade or adventure, but for peace. His story, like so many in the Middle Ages, begins with a vow that cracked under the weight of life. He had loved once, deeply, fiercely, but his marriage had ended in silence. Perhaps his wife had died young, or perhaps she had simply grown tired of waiting for his return from war. Whatever the truth, Thomas now carries that emptiness like a relic, wrapped in the folds of his cloak. And so, as the law of his time decreed, he sets out on pilgrimage. For in those days, heartbreak could be mended not by time alone, but by distance sanctified. The church taught that walking to a holy site, Canterbury, Compostela, Rome, could cleanse the soul of sorrow, just as confession cleansed it of sin. Imagine the road before him. A narrow ribbon of mud and stone winding through fields still damp with morning dew. Birds rise from the hedgerows in sudden bursts of wings. The wind hums low through the grass, carrying the faint scent of heather and smoke. Thomas walks in silence, his boots leaving shallow prints that the rain soon fills. Each step feels both heavy and holy. Along the way, he meets others like himself. A widow with her rosary tucked beneath her shawl, a soldier limping from an old wound, a boy carrying a wooden cross no larger than his arm. They walk together for a time, sharing bread, stories, and long stretches of wordless companionship. In that strange brotherhood of travelers, no one asks why another walks. Pain is assumed, like hunger or weather. At night, they rest in inns or roadside shrines. The rules of pilgrimage are simple. No feasting, no boasting, no unnecessary comfort. But there are laws even older than those, the unspoken ones of kindness. The host who shares a crust of bread. The farmer who leaves his gate open for weary travelers. The abbess who offers soup without question. In a world bound by order, mercy became its own rebellion. One night, Thomas stops by a small chapel perched above a valley. The stone walls are cracked, the roof half gone, but inside, a candle still burns. The light trembles against the worn carving of a saint. Maybe Saint Julian, patron of travelers. Thomas kneels, his hands rough and red from the cold. He doesn't pray for forgiveness. He prays for stillness, for the quiet that must surely live beneath all this wandering. There's an old belief from those times, written in the margins of sermons and pilgrim guides, that a broken heart could be walked smooth. The idea was that each mile rubbed away a little pain, until what was jagged became rounded, bearable. The church turned that notion into law, absolution through motion, and perhaps there was wisdom in it. After all, grief has its own rhythm, doesn't it? Step, breath, memory, step. The road becomes a kind of rosary, each footprint a prayer. You can almost hear it now, can't you? That soft ring echoing through the distance, blending with your own heartbeat. The same rhythm, ancient and slow. By the time Thomas reaches the coast weeks later, the world feels wider. He watches the sea stretching endless and gray, hears the gulls cry above the waves. He unties the ribbon from his wrist, the only token left from his marriage, and lets it fall into the tide. The water takes it gently, as if it's been waiting. For the first time in months, he smiles. No one would write down his name or mark his journey, but his story lives in every pilgrim's path, every law of faith that tried, in its imperfect way, to understand the ache of being human. Back then, love was sacred, sorrow was law, and walking was redemption. Today, we might call it healing. They called it penance. Perhaps the words don't matter, only the peace that waits at the end of the road. And as the wind lifts the last trace of his scent from the shore, we follow it inland again, to another kind of vow, not of love or loss, but of silence. A promise made not by lovers or priests, but by monks who gave up speech itself, believing that words were the heaviest burden of all. The path winds uphill, bordered by ivy and moss. The air cools as we climb, the chatter of the village fading until only the wind remains. Ahead rises an abbey, gray, solemn, its walls breathing a hush so deep that even the birds seem to circle softly, as though afraid to disturb it. We step inside and the world changes. The light is dim, filtered through narrow windows that slice the dawn into golden bars. Dust floats in those beams like snow suspended mid-fall. Somewhere, unseen hands turn pages, their faint rustle the only reminder that life stirs here. This is the world of the vowed silent. Monks and nuns who, centuries ago, surrendered speech as an offering to God. To modern ears, it sounds severe, even lonely. But to them, it was freedom. The regula silentiae, the rule of silence, was not punishment. It was discipline, a law designed to tame the restless tongue and, through it, the restless heart. Imagine waking each day before sunrise to the sound of a single bell. You rise, wash your face in cold water, and walk to the chapel in silence. No greetings, no chatter. Just the soft shuffle of sandals on stone. The air smells of beeswax and old wood. As you kneel, the quiet wraps around you like a cloak. The only voices allowed are those raised in prayer, chanting in slow, low tones that vibrate through your ribs like the hum of the earth itself. Outside the cloister, the world is noisy, markets, gossip, the cries of hawkers. But here, the law of silence reigns. The monks even develop gestures to replace speech. A hand to the lips meant peace, 2 fingers crossed meant bread, a sweep of the palm meant book. Language reduced to motion, communication made holy. And yet, this wasn't silence in the way we imagine it. Cold, empty, suffocating. It was active quiet. Every hour had purpose. Monks copied manuscripts, brewed ale, tended gardens, healed the sick, all without a single word spoken beyond prayer. Their silence wasn't absence. It was attention sharpened to a blade. And as the firelight fades, imagine stepping outside, just for a moment. The village is still. The stars tremble faintly above the black outline of the church steeple. You exhale, your breath white in the cold. No sound but the hum of your own breath. This is the world as it once was, sleeping, obedient to silence. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The faint scratch of quills across parchment, the drip of ink, the steady rhythm of breathing. In that stillness, the mind becomes vast. Thoughts stretch like wings. For some, the rule of silence was a refuge from sorrow. For others, it was a path to wisdom. To live without speech was to live without distraction. But the strangest part of all was how the law adapted to kindness. Within many orders, if a monk saw another in distress, the silence could be broken. Compassion, it was said, outranked obedience. Even quiet had to bow before love. That balance, restraint with mercy, is what made the rule endure for centuries. There's a small legend from a Cistercian abbey in the 12th century. A novice monk who struggled terribly with the vow. He'd been a storyteller in his village, a man whose words had always drawn crowds. On his first day of silence, he nearly wept. For weeks he worked in the gardens, lips pressed shut, heart heavy with words unsaid. But one morning, as he watched the sun rise over the fields, He realized that the light itself told stories better than he ever could. After that, he never missed speech again. It's a gentle kind of irony, isn't it? The vow of silence wasn't about denying expression. It was about finding a purer one. In stillness, the monks heard music the world had forgotten. The rhythm of their own breath, the murmur of wind through cloisters, the heartbeat of prayer. And maybe, in some quiet way, they understood something we've lost, that silence itself can love us back. Now, as dusk gathers around the abbey, the monks file once more into the chapel. Candles flicker along the altar, their light trembling on the walls. The chant begins, low and steady, Latin words blending into one another until meaning dissolves into melody. The sound is less like singing and more like breathing made divine. Outside, night spreads slowly across the fields. The stars appear one by one, bright as thoughts unspoken. The bell tolls once more, not as command this time, but as reminder. The day has ended. The silence remains. And as we leave that abbey behind, our next story rises from the very heart of this stillness. The laws not of faith or speech, but of death itself. How medieval people governed their graves, their burials, and the curious rituals that turned passing into ceremony. So take one deep breath. Feel that quiet settle into you like cool stone. The next chapter of our journey will begin not with fear, but with reverence, the strange medieval laws of rest eternal. The night has deepened, and the road bends toward quiet ground. The air cools, thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. Ahead, through the trees, you see the shape of a churchyard. Low stone walls, leaning crosses, and a gate that creaks like a sigh when pushed open. The world feels slower here, as if even time walks carefully among the graves. Now, let's linger here a little longer, because the story of strange medieval laws has only just begun. In the medieval world, death was never private. It was ritual, layered with rules so intricate they might seem strange to us now, yet each one made sense to those who lived by them. The church saw the body not as an end but as a vessel on loan, one that had to be treated with respect and legal precision when its time was done. Picture a small village in the 1400s. Someone has passed away in the night. The bell ringer climbs the tower, wraps the rope around his wrist, and begins to toll slowly, once for each decade of the person's life. The sound drifts over the rooftops, soft as a lullaby. Farmers pause in their fields, mothers hush their children, and for a moment, everyone listens. That sound isn't just mourning, it's notice. The community becomes one heartbeat. Before the burial, the law required certain rites. The body must be washed, wrapped in linen, and placed in the home for a night so neighbors could pay respect. It wasn't superstition. It was community accountability, proof that no death went unnoticed. Candles were kept burning beside the body until dawn, the light symbolizing the soul's steady journey through the dark. And then came the procession. Men carried the bier, women followed behind, each step slow, deliberate, measured. The priest walked ahead, swinging a censer, the air shimmering with frankincense. Children tossed sprigs of rosemary, the herb of remembrance. It was both grief and gratitude, sadness softened by rhythm. But even in death, there were laws of status. Where you were buried depended on who you were. The rich lay within church walls, close to the altar, the holiest ground. The poor rested outside, under open sky. Yet this too had reason. The belief was that proximity to prayer hastened the soul's ascent, and those outside received blessings carried on the wind from every mass within. It's easy to think of that as inequality, but to the people of those times it was balance. Everyone belonged somewhere, even in eternity. There's an old rule, written in the diocesan rolls of Winchester, that forbade burial before the third toll of the morning bell. The idea was practical, to prevent premature burial in an age when medicine was uncertain. It's haunting, yes, but also deeply human. A law born from fear and mercy intertwined. And then there were the sins of the grave, acts punished even after death. Grave robbing, for instance, wasn't just theft. It was sacrilege. The punishment could be excommunication, the medieval equivalent of erasing someone from society. Yet the strangest cases involved those who stole shrouds, not for greed, but for healing rituals, believing the fabric held protective power. In a world balanced between faith and folklore, even crime could carry traces of hope. Now imagine the churchyard at dusk. The grass whispers under a cool wind, and a single candle flickers by a new mound of earth. Somewhere, a nightingale begins to sing, a thin, trembling melody that seems to rise from the very soil. For all their rules, their rights, their fears, the people of that age understood something profound. That peace needs ritual. That to honor life, one must honor its end. If you listen closely, you can almost hear their prayers, soft Latin words blending with the rustle of leaves.
Requiem aeternam dona eis, Domina.
Grant them eternal rest. The village clock has gone quiet now, its echo faded into the folds of the hills. You can almost feel the weight of that medieval darkness. Thick, velvety, not threatening but complete. Imagine standing at the edge of that silence, the kind of quiet so deep that your own breath feels too loud. The sky stretches wide above, sprinkled with faint stars like chalk dust. Somewhere, an owl drifts soundlessly across the fields, its wings slicing through the cold night air. It's a comforting phrase, isn't it? Even now, across centuries, the wish remains the same: to rest safely, to be remembered kindly, to leave a story behind. And perhaps that's why so many medieval laws feel tender when we see them closely. They weren't made to control so much as to preserve love, life, silence, and even death itself. Rules not of punishment, but of care disguised as order. Now the candles in that small graveyard burn lower. The last one flickers out, and darkness folds over the stones like a blanket. The air hums faintly with the echo of a bell from somewhere far away. Slow, measured, ancient. The same sound that once told a village when to rest, when to rise, when to love, when to let go. Take one last deep breath. Let the quiet fill you, steady and slow. Our next chapter will open not in churches or cottages, but in the streets again, among jesters, outlaws, and fools who made mockery itself a profession, and whose laughter, too, lived by law. Morning returns like spilled gold across the rooftops, and the same bells that once tolled for rest now ring for celebration. The village, still soft from sleep, stirs to life with a hum that feels different, lighter, mischievous. The tavern shutters swing open, ribbons hang from windows, and from somewhere down the lane comes the first sound of a drum. Today is no ordinary day. It's the Feast of Fools. The air itself seems to shimmer with rebellion. Men trade hats with women, priests wear masks, children chase geese through the square. It's a world turned upside down, and for 24 hours, even the most sacred rules bend until they nearly break. Yet, and this is the beautiful part, the chaos was never truly lawless. It was written into custom, sanctioned by the very church that usually forbade such noise. A ritual of release so that order could survive the rest of the year. Imagine the scene. The town square draped in banners of red and green, musicians gathered on barrels, their lutes and flutes squeaking out tunes that sound half joyful, half dangerous. In the center stands a figure in patchwork robes, the Lord of Misrule, a mock king chosen from the poorest of the poor. His crown is a wreath of garlic bulbs and ivy, his scepter a wooden spoon. Yet as he raises his arm, the crowd cheers as though he were a monarch born of gold. For one brief day, power itself is theater. The bishop becomes the jester, the cobbler becomes the duke. Even the town constable bows with exaggerated grace, laughing as he does. To modern eyes, it looks absurd, but to them it was balance, a way of draining the pressure from a world built on rank and obedience. Laughter was their safety valve, and it wasn't just laughter for its own sake. The law of fools had boundaries, as all things in that age did. Mock the bishop, yes, but only until sunset. Throw flour at your neighbor, but never draw blood. Dance in the streets, but step aside when the clergy passes. Even in chaos, there were limits, written not on parchment but in memory, passed down through years of revelry and repentance. And inside every small timber house, families huddle near the last embers of their hearths. A mother whispers a prayer that the coals will still have life by dawn. The father checks the latch on the door twice, maybe 3 times, because the law of silence also guards against thieves. Not just fire, but fear itself was kept at bay by that nightly curfew. You can almost feel it now. The heat of the crowd, the scent of roasted chestnuts and ale, the thrum of drums echoing between stone walls. A juggler tosses apples into the air, catching them with easy grace. A group of children chant a rhyme about a king with donkey ears, their laughter high and sweet. Somewhere nearby, a man in a pig mask recites mock sermons to a roaring audience. It all sounds wild, but beneath the noise runs a current of wisdom. The Feast of Fools, strange as it seems, reminded people of the fragility of hierarchy, that behind every crown sat a man with flaws, and behind every beggar a spark of wit or dignity. The world was easier to bear when it could be laughed at once a year. And so, the church tolerated the madness, even blessed it in some places. For they knew that laughter was not rebellion but renewal. It let the people breathe. There's an old saying from that time, "Better a day of folly than a year of unrest." It's true in ways that still echo. The villagers, drunk on joy, found something like healing in their absurdity. To mock what frightened them, hunger, power, death, was to make it smaller. As the day wears on, the mock king climbs the steps of the church and gives his sermon. His voice booms, ridiculous and grand. "My children," he says, "today we shall sin with style." The crowd howls. Then, at his signal, they all kneel, laughing and solemn at once, and he blesses them with a ladle of ale. When dusk finally comes, the laughter begins to fade. Masks are removed, hats returned, roles restored. The same priest who chuckled at the pig-faced preacher now wipes his brow and mutters a prayer. The Lord of Misrule hands back his crown of garlic and bows. The world rights itself again as though sighing with relief. Yet for a few hours everyone, rich and poor, saint and sinner, had stood on the same ground. And in that brief equality there was peace. Now, as the crowd disperses and the torches burn low, another sound rises behind the laughter. A softer one, the gentle ring of a distant bell, calls not for joy, but for judgment. For while the Feast of Fools broke one kind of order, another kind of law waited just beyond the light. The strange medieval rules of crime and punishment, where justice itself sometimes wore the mask of theater. The torches are dying out in the square. The musicians have gone home, their laughter trailing off into the alleys. What remains is the hush that follows joy, that strange, weightless silence that feels almost guilty after too much laughter. And in that stillness, the sound of boots begins to echo, slow, deliberate, heavy with authority. It's the town constable making his rounds, lantern swinging from his hand, light bending on wet cobblestones. A few stragglers slip away into doorways, whispering promises to behave until next year's feast. The day of folly is over. The law has returned. You might think of it as strange, a rule telling people when to sleep, but when you live in a time where candles were a luxury and the night belonged to creatures of rumor and legend, the quiet became comfort. The dark wasn't just emptiness. It was protection, a blanket laid gently over the world. But in the Middle Ages, law was never simple. It lived halfway between reason and ritual, between fear and fairness. Every town had its own customs of punishment, and many of them, to modern minds, seem almost theatrical, justice as performance, designed not just to correct but to teach, even entertain. Imagine the square at midday. A wooden platform stands near the well, its boards creaking underfoot. On it sits a man with his head and hands locked in the stocks. Children giggle as they pass, tossing bits of straw. A baker brings a loaf of stale bread and hands it to the prisoner, not out of cruelty, but pity. Around them, life continues.
No guards, no courtroom.
Just the quiet understanding that the shame itself is the sentence. Strange as it seems, these public punishments were rooted in practicality. Prisons were expensive. Justice had to be swift and visible. So instead of locking people away, the town placed them where everyone could see. Not to destroy them, but to remind others what order looked like. Shame was the medieval version of awareness. You can almost hear the sounds of it, the clatter of buckets, the murmur of gossip, the faint, embarrassed cough of the man in the stocks. It isn't cruel, not exactly. The punishments that horrify us now, branding, the gallows, the wheel, existed, yes, but for most small crimes humiliation was enough. To steal bread was human. To be mocked for it was deterrent enough. There's a strange tenderness hiding in that, if you listen closely. Even justice, back then, carried a rhythm of mercy. The townsfolk might jeer for a moment, then slip food or water to the shamed. Children would whisper, "He's learned." And by evening, the square would be swept clean. Tomorrow, the same man might be seen helping repair a fence or carry flour for the baker he once robbed. Punishment, in its odd medieval way, folded back into belonging. And then there were the chivalry, the noisy nights of mock justice that came not from courts but from neighbors. When someone behaved shamefully, say a husband cruel to his wife, or a widow who remarried too quickly, the village would gather under moonlight, banging pots, blowing horns, riding donkeys backward through the streets. Sounds harsh, but it was meant to restore balance, not harm. The noise washed the community clean, leaving laughter where bitterness might have taken root. Even the church, which ruled so much of daily life, used theater to teach morality. Mystery plays, great outdoor performances, turned sin and virtue into living parables. The actors were local folk, the stage, the churchyard itself. One moment, the crowd would laugh at a bumbling devil tumbling into a puddle. The next, they'd fall silent as a saint rose glowing in the torchlight. The line between law and lesson blurred until it was almost poetic. And always, there was that hum beneath it all, the sense that rules, however strange, existed to hold the fragile world together. Life was hard, unpredictable, brief. The law was their rhythm, their heartbeat, their promise that morning would come again after every storm of chaos. Now, as the constable finishes his round, he pauses by the square. The stocks are empty. A cat darts across the cobbles, chasing a moth. Somewhere, behind shuttered windows, a woman hums a lullaby, her voice low and steady. The town sleeps under its own strange peace, laughter fading, justice satisfied, the stars looking down like watchful eyes. The law of fools and the law of fairness were never enemies, only partners in the same fragile dance. One made the other possible. Laughter taught forgiveness. Punishment taught restraint. Together, they kept the balance that held the medieval world in place. Sometimes, I think how curious it is that we've lost that kind of darkness. Today, our nights hum with neon signs and television screens, and the glow from one city leaks into the next until even the stars retreat. But back then, the stars ruled the hours after 9. You could tell the time by how far Orion had climbed across the sky, or by the soft rhythm of your own pulse. But there was another kind of law, quieter still, one that lived not in courts or squares but in the very seasons themselves. The laws of nature, harvest, and superstition. The invisible rules that told people when to plant, when to reap, and what unseen forces must never be angered. So as the torches fade and the night stretches its long arms across the rooftops, we'll follow that silence out of town, into the dark fields where the wind hums low through barley and the moon watches like a lantern hung by God himself. The air smells of earth and smoke. The village lies behind us now, nothing but a cluster of faint lights on the horizon. Ahead stretches farmland, wide, rippling, silver under the moon. You can almost hear it breathe, the slow pulse of the soil beneath your feet. In this quiet, every sound matters. The soft click of crickets, the sigh of grass moving with the wind, the faint, distant bark of a shepherd's dog. This is where the oldest laws live. Not in ink, not in stone, but in stories and rituals older than memory. The medieval farmer might not have been able to read a royal decree, but he knew by instinct and tradition the rules that governed his survival. When to sow, when to harvest, when to rest, when to light candles for rain, and when to stay indoors so as not to offend the sky. Take a breath. Smell that cool damp scent, the promise of growth. Imagine it's early spring in the year 1327. The frost has barely left the ground. A man named Alric kneels in his field, turning the first clump of soil with his spade. He murmurs a prayer, half Latin, half local dialect, offering the first handful of seed not to the earth, but to the crows watching on the fence. They are thieves, yes, but also omens, and ignoring omens, as every farmer knew, was a sure way to invite ruin. That small offering, that handful of grain tossed skyward, is its own kind of law, a bargain between human and nature. To modern minds, it's superstition. To Alric, it's logic. The world is alive, full of unseen neighbors who demand respect, spirits of field and stream, saints of harvest and weather. In a time when drought or blight could erase a village, appeasing them was a matter of survival. Even the church, for all its authority, quietly absorbed these beliefs. Priests blessed plows before spring planting, sprinkled holy water on seeds, and held processions through the fields. The people called it beating the bounds, walking the borders of the parish, marking the land with prayer and song. It was law by rhythm, binding community to soil, faith to furrow. You can almost picture it now. A line of villagers moving slowly through the fields, lanterns swaying, voices humming an old hymn. Children carry willow branches, brushing the ground as they go. When they reach a stream, the priest dips his fingers into the cold water and makes the sign of the cross. The air smells of damp leaves and beeswax candles. The people smile, not out of joy exactly, but out of relief. The ritual is done. The land, for another year, has been seen. But the laws of nature were not always gentle. There were rules of fear, too. Never plow on a saint's feast day. Never harvest on a Sunday. Never whistle at night, lest you call the wind spirits. And whatever you do, never burn old bread, it offends the wheat. These small taboos seem quaint now, but to those who lived by them, they were threads in the same web that held the world together. Even illness was bound by such belief. A strange mist might be blamed on restless souls. A failed crop might mean someone had broken a ritual. And so, superstition became its own invisible government, one no king could overrule. Still, there were always those who tried to defy the bell. The tavern keeper's son, for instance. Let's imagine him, can we? His name might be Hugh. He's 18, with hands that smell of oak and ale. When the bell tolls, his father bars the tavern door, but Hugh lingers, wiping down the tables slower than he needs to, humming a tune that would have been forbidden under stricter watch. Then, when the streets fall still, he slips through the back, into the alley where the moonlight paints silver lines on the cobblestones. Still, there was beauty in it. These customs, for all their oddness, taught care, for land, for rhythm, for balance. They made people listen. A farmer might place milk at the edge of a field for the good folk, not out of fear but gratitude. To share abundance was to invite more. If you close your eyes now, you can almost feel the warmth of the soil against your palms. You can hear the faint hum of bees, the rustle of wheat still green. Everything alive, everything bound by unseen covenant. And as the seasons turn, the wheat golden, the apples red, the evenings long, those old laws shift quietly. The harvest nears, and with it comes another kind of rule. The harvest law, where generosity and greed meet under one sky, and where a single sheaf left standing can decide whether a village thrives or hungers. So let's stay in this quiet field a moment longer. The moon hangs high. The wind moves through the barley in waves that sound like whispering. Take another breath, slow and deep, and when you're ready, we'll follow those whispers into the final part of this chapter, where harvest becomes law, and the simple act of giving back becomes sacred. The days have grown shorter, the light richer, as though the sun itself has turned to honey. The wheat stands tall and heavy, bending gently under its own gold. Every sound seems round and full, the hum of bees, the soft swish of sickles, the laughter of workers moving through the rows. It is harvest time, and in the medieval world that meant more than gathering grain. It meant obeying one of the oldest and kindest laws on earth, the law of gleaning. Picture a farmer standing at the edge of his field, sweat on his brow, sickle in hand. He's done his work well, the wagons are full, but by custom and by law he must not take everything. He leaves behind what the sickle missed, what the wind has bent, what the children's hands couldn't reach. These remnants belong to the poor, the widowed, the traveler passing by. To gather them would be theft against heaven itself. It's a humble rule, but profound in its simplicity. A commandment of mercy written into the soil. The church reinforced it, quoting from Leviticus, "Thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field." Yet it existed long before Scripture reached these lands. Every village, every farmer, understood the quiet justice of leaving something behind. It wasn't charity, it was balance. Imagine it. Late afternoon, the sky washed with amber. The reapers have gone home, their songs fading across the hills. Now, in the hush of evening, the gleaners arrive. Women in plain dresses, children carrying baskets made of willow, old men leaning on staffs. They move slowly, stooping to gather what's left. A few stalks here, a handful there. The sound of their steps is soft, almost reverent. No one speaks. The air hums with the rustle of grain, the whisper of wind, the rhythm of breathing. The scent of crushed straw hangs heavy, mingling with the faint sweetness of wildflowers at the edge of the field. It's work, yes, but also ritual, a prayer of movement and gratitude. He meets a girl there, perhaps the blacksmith's daughter, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. They don't speak loudly. The walls have ears after all. But their laughter is soft, trembling, warm. The night bell's law wasn't made for them, yet it becomes the secret frame around their small rebellion. For centuries, the rule of silence would coexist with whispers like theirs, quiet enough to escape the notice of lawmen but loud enough to echo in the memory of a village. There's a small boy among them, maybe 8 years old, his cheeks dusty, his eyes bright. He finds a single ear of barley, still perfect, and holds it up to the light as though it were treasure. His mother smiles, tucking it into her basket. That grain, humble as it is, might feed them tomorrow. And so, in this quiet way, the field gives twice, once to the farmer, once to the forgotten. Even the lords respected this law. To deny gleaners was not just cruel, it was dangerous. The villagers might see it as cursing the land itself. A stingy harvest this year could mean ruin next year. Generosity wasn't just virtue, it was insurance. The earth favored those who shared her gifts. And so the cycle continued year after year. Sickle, prayer, feast, and rest. When the last sheaf was cut, the people gathered for the harvest home, the final festival of the season. A wagon decorated with flowers carried the last bundle of wheat, called the corn dolly, to the manor house. There, it was blessed and kept by the hearth through winter, a charm to guard against hunger. You can almost see it. Torches flickering against twilight, music rising, the clink of mugs filled with new ale. People dance barefoot in the stubble, their laughter carried by the wind. Even the animals seem calmer, as though the fields themselves are sighing with relief. The law of gleaning, the feast of harvest, all of it woven from the same thread. Gratitude turned into order. The medieval world, for all its superstition and sorrow, understood something sacred about sharing. They didn't need words like charity or justice. They had rhythm, season, and the simple grace of leaving enough for others. As the night deepens, the music slows. Lanterns glow like small suns along the hedges. Somewhere, a priest lifts a cup and blesses the new grain. Around him, the villagers hum a tune. Not loud, not solemn, but steady. It sounds a little like contentment, a little like prayer. And there, under the fading stars, the old laws rest. The law of laughter, of shame, of soil, of song. Each one strange to us now, yet each born of something familiar. The desire for peace, for safety, for meaning. Take one more breath and listen to that quiet field. You can almost hear the earth sleeping, the sound of harvest settling like a sigh. When we wake again, our journey will carry us farther, into the cold stone halls of kings, where rules were carved not from soil but from fear. The next chapter will lead us to the royal courts, where obedience was survival and mercy was a luxury few could afford. But for now, stay here a moment longer, in this golden peace. The field is calm, the night warm, and the stars look kind tonight. Now, if you listen closely, you can hear the soft shuffle of Hugh's boots on the wet stones, the rustle of fabric, the faint sigh of someone too young to worry about rules. Even their footsteps sound sleepy, like they're afraid to wake the world. The golden quiet of the harvest fades behind us. The earth's warmth gives way to chill stone, and the hum of crickets is replaced by the echo of boots on marble floors. We've arrived at the heart of the kingdom, the royal court. The air here feels heavier, perfumed with smoke, wax, and calculation. Every whisper is weighed, every glance recorded like scripture. This is where law takes human form, not the kind scratched into parchment by village scribes, but the kind that breathes through kings. Their word was command, their temper decree. And in the Middle Ages, loyalty itself was law. Picture the Great Hall. High ceilings carved with saints and monsters, tapestries of wars and weddings fluttering in the candle breeze. The king sits on a chair of oak, its legs shaped like lion paws. Around him gather nobles in silks and mail, faces gleaming in the torchlight. Courtiers hover like moths around flame, drawn close, knowing too much light burns. Even here, in this splendid world, rules governed everything. How one bowed, how long one knelt, when to speak and when to stay silent. To step out of rhythm could mean exile or worse. Yet it all appeared graceful, like music that hides its own tension beneath harmony. You can almost hear it, the shuffle of feet, the murmur of courtiers rehearsing their words, the faint crack of a log in the vast fireplace. Somewhere, a page hurries by, clutching a scroll sealed in wax. It bears not just ink, but fate. For in these halls, a single signature could build or break a family. One such law, simple but merciless, was the oath of fealty. Every noble, every knight, even the smallest landowner swore it. Kneeling before the throne, they placed their hands within the king's and promised service with this chilling phrase, "I am your man." From that moment, disobedience was treason, and treason was death. But what made these laws strange was not their severity, it was their intimacy. Loyalty wasn't just duty, it was emotion, performance, even theater. Fealty ceremonies resembled marriages. Vows spoken, hands clasped, eyes meeting under candlelight. Betrayal, then, wasn't just political, it was heartbreak turned deadly. There's a story, whispered through centuries, of a knight named Geraint, who swore loyalty to his king and served him faithfully for years. When famine struck the land, Geraint stole from the royal stores to feed his starving village. He was caught, of course, but when brought before the throne, the king didn't rage. He wept. Then, with quiet dignity, he declared, "You have broken my heart and my law." The punishment was exile, not execution. Mercy, rare as sunlight in those days, became legend. That's what made the medieval court both terrifying and beautiful. Law tempered by feeling, cruelty softened by ritual. Kings ruled not only through fear but through spectacle. Their justice had choreography. Imagine the king's council chamber late at night. Candles gutter low, smoke curling like ghosts toward the ceiling. Advisors argue in low tones, their rings clinking against goblets. A map spreads across the table. Inked borders, tiny crowns, oceans marked with dragons. Each decision made here, a tax, a pardon, a war, ripples outward to villages we've already visited. To the baker, the monk, the gleaner in the field. The king's laws reach everyone, even those who never know his name. But there's something else that happens under the curfew bell, something that made the rule even more meaningful. When the fires went out and the people were safely inside, the monks began to sing. From abbeys and monasteries perched on distant hills, their voices drifted across the dark. The Compline, the final prayer of the day, would echo in Latin, "In manus tuas, Domini, into your hands, O Lord." Yet for all the splendor, there's a kind of loneliness here. The king eats last, sleeps least, trusts no one. Every smile hides intent. Every gift, obligation. You can almost feel it. The heavy quiet that lingers after laughter fades, when the courtiers retreat and only the guards remain. The crown gleams on the table beside the bed, not a prize but a weight. And so, behind the velvet and gold, fear becomes its own kind of order. A single word from the throne can end a life, but so too can a whisper in a corridor. Power, in this world, is fragile, glittering like frost, easily cracked. Outside the castle walls, the wind carries the murmur of the people. Prayers, songs, gossip, grievances. The king cannot hear them, not truly, yet every law he makes shapes their days. From silence to bread to color to laughter, the threads lead back here, to the throne. But even a throne must answer to something greater. In the centuries to come, strange laws will rise that limit kings themselves. Charters written in ink and blood, meant to remind rulers that no crown outweighs justice. For now, though the torches burn low, the guards trade whispers, and the stars beyond the castle seem to listen. Power hums softly through the stones. Beautiful, dangerous, temporary. Take a slow breath, let the air of the great hall settle around you, and listen to that faint echo, the heartbeat of authority, steady and distant. Soon, we'll follow it into the shadows beneath the throne, where spies, messengers, and secret scribes worked under laws no one dared to write. The great hall above sleeps. The fires have burned to embers. The throne stands empty, and the torches outside the chamber flicker weakly in their sconces. Down below, through a narrow door hidden behind the arras, another world begins, the kingdom beneath the kingdom. Stone stairs spiral downward, cool and damp. The air smells of wax, parchment, and secrets. This is the realm of the unseen. The scribes, the couriers, the watchers and whisperers who keep the crown's heartbeat steady. Here, words are both weapon and shield. Here, even silence is a kind of speech. In the medieval court, power didn't end with the king's command. It scattered, like sparks from a torch, into dozens of smaller flames. Messengers carried sealed letters to far corners of the realm. Clerks recorded taxes and tithes in crabbed Latin script. Informants traded rumor for coin. All of them lived by laws as strange as they were precise. The first rule was the oath of the seal. Any man who handled royal correspondence swore never to read what he carried, never to break wax or whisper content. It was said that even a glance at forbidden words could damn the soul. Yet everyone knew curiosity was irresistible. So the couriers developed their own secret language, little scratches along the edges of wax, patterns in the string that told them whether a letter held good news or bad. The sound was like a ribbon of light across the valley. Some villagers swore they could hear it from miles away when the wind was right. For them, it was proof that the world hadn't gone to sleep completely, that someone somewhere was still keeping watch. Imagine one of them now. A thin man on horseback, cloak drawn tight, the road muddy beneath the moon. He rides through the mist, the pouch at his side carrying a message that could start a war. His only protection is the king's seal, pressed in red wax, glinting faintly in the lantern light. He hums to himself, not for company but to keep awake. Behind him, wolves cry. Ahead, a castle waits. It's easy to forget how fragile communication was then. A letter could take weeks to reach its reader, and a single storm, thief, or lie could rewrite history. So the kings created an entire web of trust built on fear, codes, countersigns, invisible ink made of vinegar and ash. Breaking these laws wasn't just treason. It was erasing truth itself. And then there were the spies, the shadowed mirror of loyalty. Every court had them, though no one dared speak their names. A servant who listened at doors, a merchant who paid attention to which ships carried gold instead of grain, a priest who noted who confessed too little. They operated under the law of silence, a rule so absolute that those who broke it often vanished before morning. But the strangest part of all was that the spies weren't villains. In a world of fragile peace and constant plotting, they were necessary. Kings relied on them as much as on knights or priests. Trust, paradoxically, required betrayal. You can almost feel the tension of it. The soft scrape of a quill writing by candlelight, the crack of sealing wax cooling on parchment, the faint shuffle of a guard's boots in the corridor. Somewhere, two figures meet in secret, a lady of the court and a scribe. She presses a folded letter into his hand, her eyes wide. "For the king," she whispers, though both know it's not meant for him. The scribe bows, pockets the letter, and vanishes down the hall. He'll copy the words tonight, send 2 versions to 2 different men, and never sleep soundly again. That's how law worked in the shadows. Truth fractured into mirrors. And even when these hidden players were caught, their trials were quiet affairs. No public gallows for spies. Instead, a locked door, a silent prayer, and a disappearance. The record would simply read, "Dismissed from service." Yet some of them lived long enough to write their own codes. Small books bound in leather, filled with advice for surviving power. One of them, an anonymous author in the 15th century, left behind a single haunting line. "Say nothing, remember everything, forgive no one." It's a rule that feels almost modern, doesn't it? The same logic that governs politics still hums in those words. But even among these shadows, light had a way of finding its place. There were scribes who risked their lives to preserve truth, chroniclers who defied kings by writing history as it was, not as it was ordered. Some of their manuscripts survive still, ink faded but stubborn. They broke the laws of silence to give us the memory of their world. And that's really what the law was about, the idea that rest could be shared. The same silence that covered the poor covered the rich. The same stillness belonged to everyone. The bell didn't just end the day, it leveled it. Now, as dawn begins to touch the horizon, the underground chambers grow still. The messengers sleep beside their saddles. The scribes curl up near their candles. Above them, the king dreams, unaware that half his kingdom's power lies in the hands of those he never sees. The first bird begins to sing outside, faint and fragile. Its voice echoes down the stairwell, brushing against the chill air like a promise that even secrets can't last forever. And as the night gives way to morning, another law rises, not one of fear or loyalty, but of honor. The code that guided knights and warriors, a rule of courage written in both steel and silence. The first light spills across the courtyard, soft and cold. The castle stirs. A stable hand yawns. A rooster crows somewhere near the wall, and the smell of smoke from morning fires creeps into the air. Out beyond the gates, the fields glisten with dew, and on the training ground, the sound of iron begins to ring. A line of knights stand shoulder to shoulder, their breath misting in the chill. The sky is still pale, the color of pewter. They wait silently as their captain approaches, his boots crunching on the gravel. He carries no scrolls, no crown, only a sword worn smooth at the hilt. When he speaks, his voice is steady, low, like the rhythm of hooves on distant soil. Remember the code. Those 3 words, quiet, familiar, are law, not written by kings or priests, but by centuries of men who believed that strength meant nothing without restraint. The code of chivalry, they called it, a strange mixture of discipline and dream, equal parts justice, mercy, and theater. To us, it sounds romantic, but in the Middle Ages, it was survival wrapped in poetry. A knight's honor wasn't just pride. It was his passport through a violent world. Picture one of them. A young man, armor gleaming faintly, a crest embroidered on his surcoat. His horse stamps the ground, snorting small clouds into the morning air. He bows before his lord, touches the pommel of his sword, and recites his oath, to protect the weak, to be loyal, to tell truth, to show mercy. The words are simple, but each one carries the weight of centuries. And yet, these laws of honor were full of paradoxes. The same knight who vowed to spare the helpless might ride into battle the next day and burn a village under royal command. The same man who swore to serve God might duel for vanity or vengeance. They lived between ideals and orders, their code forever in conflict with the crown's will. Imagine lying in bed beneath a woolen blanket, the straw beneath your mattress rustling softly. You can hear the faint drip of rain from the thatch above, and the rhythm of your own breathing. Beyond the door, the whole village is wrapped in the same dream. For a few short hours each night, there are no merchants or masons, no lords or serfs, only sleepers. Still, the code mattered because it gave shape to conscience. It taught a warrior when to stop. You can almost hear the rhythm of it, the clatter of chainmail, the scrape of blades against whetstone, the faint murmur of prayer as each man kneels before his sword. not to worship it, but to remind himself it was only an instrument. Among knights, there were unwritten rules just as binding as any law. Never strike an unarmed man. Never take a prisoner's ransom and break your word. Never boast of victory, for pride turns valor into vanity. Some knights followed these laws as faithfully as scripture. Others only pretended to. But even pretense kept the world gentler than it might have been. There's a story of Sir Renaud, a knight of Burgundy, who captured his enemy after a long siege. The man was weak, half-starved, barely able to stand. When Renaud offered him water, the prisoner hesitated, fearing poison. So Renaud drank first, then handed the cup back. "Now we're brothers in thirst," he said. The act broke no walls, won no lands, but it traveled farther than any conquest. Mercy became legend, and legends, in time, became law. That was the secret power of chivalry. It spread through imitation. One act of grace whispered into another man's story until even kings began to imitate it. Lawmakers quoted knights in their decrees. Poets turned their oaths into songs. And sometimes, when the world was quiet and the wars paused, those same knights would gather not for battle, but for ceremony. They'd remove their helmets, light candles, and speak of loyalty and faith. In that glow, the steel seemed softer, almost kind. You can picture it. A great hall, filled with men who've seen too much, sitting cross-legged like boys, listening to an old priest read from a book of virtues. The torches crackle, the shadows sway. For a moment, they look less like warriors and more like monks in armor. Because beneath every law of power lies the same wish, to be good, even when goodness costs everything. Outside, the dawn brightens. The captain raises his sword to the sun, and the others follow, the light flashing across the blades like fire caught in glass. For a heartbeat, the courtyard glows. Then the swords lower, and the men move to train, to serve, to live within their strange and fragile code. The world of kings and knights may glitter, but beneath it, another kingdom waits, quieter, older, ruled by minds rather than swords. In the next part of our journey, we'll descend from the battlements into candlelit chambers where scholars and clerics wrote the laws that still shape the world today. And in that quiet, the mind begins to wander. Perhaps Hugh dreams of the girl in the alley. The blacksmith dreams of sparks dancing from his anvil. The priest dreams of heaven's gates. Every dream a tiny fire, safely covered beneath the ash of the curfew law. The laws of thought, the laws of learning, the rules of what could and could not be known. The clang of steel fades behind us, replaced by the quiet crackle of parchment turning. The smell of oil lamps and old vellum fills the air. We're inside a monastery library, tall, vaulted, hushed, a forest of shelves where each book is a tree with roots deep in history. It's late. The candles burn low, halos of light flickering on wooden desks. A monk sits bent over a manuscript, cool poised, eyes narrowed in concentration. His breath fogs faintly in the cold. Each letter he draws is deliberate, almost prayerful. Ink pools at the tip of his pen like a drop of night. For centuries, knowledge itself lived under law. To read was privilege, to write was power. The church, protector and gatekeeper of learning, believed that truth was holy but fragile, too potent to be left in untrained hands. So they built invisible fences around it, fences of permission and sin. Certain books could be copied, others could not. Certain questions could be asked, others silenced. The boundaries of curiosity were as clear as the walls of this library. And yet, within those walls, minds burned bright. Imagine walking down one of these aisles. You run your fingers along leather spines, psalters, chronicles, herbals, bestiaries, each whispering a different fragment of the world. Some tell of kings, some of beasts that breathe fire, some of herbs that cure madness. To the medieval scholar, all knowledge, sacred or strange, belonged to the same creation. Understanding the flight of a falcon was as holy as reading a psalm. But curiosity has always tested its chains. There were monks who asked questions too bold, who dared to wonder how the stars moved or why illness struck the righteous. The church, wary of disorder, called such inquiry heresy. Entire councils gathered to decide which ideas were safe and which should be buried. And so began one of the strangest balancing acts in history. Faith guarding reason, reason flattering faith. You can almost hear it in this quiet library, the soft argument between pages. A scribe murmuring Latin verses, another whispering theories under his breath. A master correcting a novice's ink line. Mind your margins. Truth hides in the space you leave. Some of the laws were gentle, others brutal. The Index of Forbidden Books, centuries later, would name volumes too dangerous for Christian eyes. But even before that, in small monasteries like this, copying the wrong text could mean penance, exile, or silence. Imagine loving knowledge so much that you risk your soul to preserve it. There's an old legend from a French abbey of a scribe named Etienne who found an Arabic manuscript, a book of medicine unlike any he'd seen. It spoke of the heart as a pump, of blood as motion. To translate, it was forbidden, for its author was not Christian. Yet Etienne copied it by night, hiding each page beneath his robe when the bell for prayer rang. When he died, the book was found beside him, his quill still resting on the margin. His abbot ordered it burned, but a young novice smuggled one leaf away. That page, they say, survived for 200 years before anyone dared to read it again. You and I, drifting here in our own small corners of the night, are not so different. We, too, have our curfews, not sounded by bells, but by the hush of screens dimming, the soft click of doors locked, the familiar sigh that says the day is done. Strange, isn't it? How truth, no matter how small, finds its way back through the cracks of fear. The medieval mind lived in tension between the sacred and the sensible. To ask too much was dangerous. To ask nothing was worse. So scholars learned to veil their curiosity in devotion. They wrote astronomy as praise of God's design, chemistry as reverence for his creation, philosophy as humble confession. The laws of thought bent, but they never quite broke. Now the monk in our library stretches his hand, wipes a smudge of ink from his wrist, and closes the manuscript. He blows gently on the page, watching the letters dry, a small universe sealed in script. The candlelight trembles on his face. He looks up, and for the first time tonight smiles. Outside, the first drops of rain begin to tap against the window. He listens to it, hearing rhythm, pattern, logic, the same order he seeks in words. To him, rain is proof that the world itself is written in language, if only one knows how to read it. Soon he will ring the bell for matins. The other monks will rise, stretch, and file silently into the chapel. Knowledge will sleep again until morning. But the laws that held it, those invisible boundaries between wonder and sin, will not last forever. In time they will break, giving birth to a new age of discovery. For now, though, the world still dreams under its parchment sky. And as the bell tolls softly through the storm, the candle gutters out. The ink dries, the law of kings fades into the law of minds. Our next chapter will carry us into the quiet heart of those minds, into the strange and beautiful laws of belief itself, where miracles were measured, dreams judged, and even the soul had its rules. The rain has stopped, leaving the world washed clean. The sky outside the monastery is pale silver, the kind of light that makes everything look softer, the grass, the stones, even the shadows. Inside, the monks have gone to rest. Candles gutter out one by one, and silence settles like snow. This is where our journey turns inward. For in the Middle Ages, the truest laws weren't written in ink or proclaimed by kings. They were whispered into being by belief. Rules not of body, but of spirit. And as you settle deeper under your blanket, let that old medieval silence stretch its shadow over you. Let it smooth the creases from your thoughts and hush the noise inside your head. The night bell has rung, and all that remains is peace. Imagine a small chapel on a hill, its door slightly open. A single candle burns before a carved wooden cross. The flame wavers, painting the walls with gold and amber. You step inside. The air smells of myrrh and rain-damp wool. And there, in the half-light, kneeling before the altar, is a woman. Her hands are clasped, her eyes closed, her lips moving in soundless rhythm. She isn't praying for riches or mercy or rain. She's praying for a dream. In the medieval world, dreams were not private things. They were divine letters, messages from the other side of waking. The church, ever the interpreter of mystery, built laws even for those. The dream of a saint was sacred. The dream of a sinner was suspect. Dreams that came after fasting or illness were to be shared with one's confessor. Dreams after feasting, ignored. There were books, too, manuals written by monks that categorized visions. Dreams sent by God were called somnia divina. Those from the devil, somnia diabolica. And the rest, the harmless, wandering kinds that visit us all, were somnia naturalia. Even imagination had paperwork. But among the common folk, another system thrived, older, quieter, closer to the soil. They believed dreams were souls wandering, learning their lessons in the night. If you woke too suddenly, you risked trapping your spirit outside your body. That's why mothers, upon seeing a restless sleeper, would whisper, "Come back now, love, come back." You can almost feel that gentleness, can't you? The medieval night, despite its shadows, held such care. People lit candles not to fight darkness but to guide souls home. There's a story told in a village near York about a miller who dreamed of a man dressed in silver, pointing toward the river. The next morning, he went to that spot and found a purse of coins tangled in the reeds. For years after, he left bread by the water each night, an offering to the dream. When asked if he feared sorcery, he only smiled. "Not sorcery," he said, "courtesy." That was the law of souls in those days. Courtesy between worlds. You respected the unseen as you would a guest. You prayed before sleep not just for rest, but for safe passage through dream, through doubt, through death. And even death, for them, was not an ending but another law, a crossing written in ritual. The soul was weighed, quite literally, in their imagination. Angels on one side, demons on the other, scales held steady by the Virgin's hand. A life's worth of kindness could tip the balance. A whispered prayer from the living could lighten the soul's weight. So every night before bed, people recited what they called the short creed, a kind of bedtime treaty with eternity. "If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." That line, murmured by candlelight, passed through generations. It was both lullaby and law. Now, let's follow that silence as it moves across Europe, where other strange rules were written to tame the wild rhythm of human life. Laws that sound absurd to us now, yet somehow made perfect sense when candles were currency and sleep was sacred. You can almost see it, a cottage room lit by a single flame, a child under a wool blanket, eyes drooping, whispering those words with a seriousness beyond years. Outside, the wind moans softly. The parents listen, their hands folded. The flame wavers, then steadies. The world, for a moment, feels safe. In that tender rhythm between fear and faith, the medieval mind found peace. Laws of the body could be broken. Laws of the soul could only be tended. Each prayer, each dream, each sigh before sleep was a small act of repair, keeping heaven and earth stitched together through words too soft for daylight. Now the candle in that little chapel burns lower. The woman opens her eyes, calm and sure. She rises, leaves quietly, and closes the door behind her. Outside, the grass glows faintly with dew. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sings, a sound that, to her, is not random but rule. Music, after all, was heaven's most lawful language. And as the stars return, shimmering like ink on the dark sky, another question begins to unfold. One the monks and kings and peasants all asked in their own ways. What happens to the soul when it dreams too deeply? In the next part of our story, we'll drift through that question, into the twilight border where sleep and spirit meet, where ghosts walk kindly, and the strangest laws of all are written not in books, but in the hush between heartbeats. The stars have climbed higher now, cold and bright against the black sky. The land below lies still, cottages silent, rivers like strips of silver winding through the dark. Somewhere in that quiet world, a candle burns in a single window. Inside, a woman sits awake though the hour is late. She isn't working or reading. She's listening. In the Middle Ages, sleep was never taken lightly. To close one's eyes was to surrender, not just to rest but to mystery. The soul, they believed, could slip from the body and wander. And so, laws of sleep emerged, as delicate and serious as any decree of crown or church. One of these rules was simple: never fall asleep angry. Rage invited bad spirits. If two people quarreled, they were urged to reconcile before bed, lest their dreams mingle and twist. Another: never sleep with feet facing the door. That was how bodies were laid out for burial. To rest in that direction was to tempt fate. It sounds like superstition, and perhaps it was. Yet under it all was tenderness, a fear born not from ignorance, but care. They knew sleep was the closest thing to death, and they wanted to keep that passage gentle. Imagine the rhythm of their nights. No single stretch of 8 hours, but 2 separate sleeps. The first sleep began after sundown. Families gathered around the fire, then drifted to bed as the coals dimmed. Around midnight they would wake, naturally, to pray, to talk, to tend fires or check on livestock. This was the watch, a quiet hour of reflection. Then came the second sleep, carrying them softly into dawn. But before we travel on, take another breath, slow, deep, unhurried. Let your shoulders sink, your jaw unclench, because our next tale begins not with fire or silence, but with bread. There's something beautiful about that pattern, isn't there? The idea that even sleep had intermission, that the dark itself invited contemplation. People called those waking hours the peace of the night, and within that peace stories grew. They said that between the 2 sleeps, when the world was halfway dreaming, the boundaries between realms grew thin. Ghosts could visit, saints could whisper, and loved ones long gone might appear at the bedside. It was a time when prayers reached heaven faster, and sins weighed lighter in the dark. You can almost see it, the flicker of a single hearth, the soft glow of embers painting the room orange and gold. A man sits up from his straw mattress, rubs his eyes, and listens. Outside, wind hums through the cracks in the wood. He thinks he hears a familiar voice, his father's, perhaps, calling from years ago. He smiles, not in fear but in comfort. In that moment, law and longing are the same. Even the church, cautious as it was, found space for these beliefs. Manuals for confessors advised priests to ask about night visitations. Were they from angels or from the restless dead? The line between sin and sanctity blurred softly, like mist over the fields. In some places, they even held what were called ghost trials. If a haunting persisted, villagers would summon the priest and read Holy Writ aloud to the unseen. The ghost, they believed, could testify not through words, but through signs. A candle that flickered at the right verse, a door that opened without touch. Justice extended beyond the grave because peace did too. The strangest rule of all, though, was the law of the bell. When someone died, the church bell tolled not only for the living to mourn, but to guide the soul's journey. But if a bell rang by itself in the night, it meant the dead were restless. Villagers would leave bowls of milk at crossroads to soothe them, small, wordless treaties with the unseen. And so, the night became both courtroom and cradle. Every sound, every dream, every flicker of light carried meaning. Sleep was no mere pause. It was participation in the vast order of things, a nightly rehearsal for eternity. Now imagine lying down in that world. The fire has burned low. The shutters are closed. Your body is heavy with warmth, but your mind still hums with wonder. Somewhere nearby, a dog sighs, a baby murmurs in its cradle, and the wind strokes the thatch above you. You whisper a short prayer, half habit, half hope, and let the weight of the blanket pull you under. Outside, the village sleeps. Inside, the soul wanders through fields of memory, through the long corridors of time. Maybe it pauses beside an old oak, where a lantern still glows in some forgotten century. Maybe it listens to the echo of a bell that rang for someone you never knew. And when morning comes, the first rooster's cry breaks the spell. The soul returns, quiet, obedient, carrying fragments of its journey. You wake, stretch, blink at the pale light seeping through the window. For a moment, The dream lingers, soft as breath, gone as soon as you speak. And as we leave those quiet English streets behind, the scent of warm loaves and fresh yeast begins to rise in the air. In that brief silence between sleep and waking, you understand what the medievals meant. That rest, too, is law, a rhythm set by something wiser than kings. Now, as the sun edges over the horizon, the final part of our story approaches, where all these strange laws, from curfews to dreams, come together like threads in one vast tapestry, a reflection on what they really sought. Not control, but peace. Morning has arrived again, pale and tender. A mist curls low over the meadows, softening the edges of everything. The fields, the roofs, the narrow road that leads back to the town, all blurred by light. The bell rings once more, not as command, not as warning, but as rhythm. The same sound that once ordered silence now greets the day. It feels as though the world itself is waking slowly, rubbing its eyes after a long dream. The baker stirs his coals. A monk opens the chapel door. A farmer crosses himself before touching the plow. Each gesture, small and ordinary, is also obedience, to custom, to comfort, to something larger than reason. All those laws we've drifted through, curfews, bread weights, colors, vows, harvests, sleep, begin to make sense when seen together. They were never just rules. They were lullabies disguised as order. The medieval world, with all its strictness, its fear, its superstition, was trying to do something profoundly tender, to make life bearable, to give pattern to the chaos of living. If the bell told you when to sleep, if the bread law told you when to eat, if the festival told you when to laugh, then the mystery of existence became just a little less frightening. You can almost hear that rhythm now, can't you? The bell tolling in the distance, the rustle of a miller's sack, the quiet scuff of boots on cobblestone. Beneath it all runs a kind of heartbeat, steady, ancient, human. Imagine for a moment standing in the middle of that medieval town square at dawn. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and yeast. A woman draws water from the well. A boy chases a chicken across the street. A priest yawns as he walks toward morning prayer. No one thinks of the laws that shape their every move. They simply live within them as fish live within water. The rules are invisible, but they hold everything up. And that's the secret beauty of it all. What we call control, they called care. When a bell forced silence, it wasn't tyranny. It was safety from fire. When bread was weighed, it wasn't greed, it was fairness. When laughter was licensed, it wasn't mockery, it was healing. Every strange law hid a kindness, even if it wore the mask of command. The next morning in that same village, the curfew has lifted, and the world wakes in soft shades of gold and gray. The bell that once silenced the streets now calls them back to life. Smoke curls again from chimneys, roosters protest the dawn, and the smell of baking bread drifts through the air, thick, yeasty, comforting. Maybe that's why so many of their customs survive in faint echoes. The bedtime prayer, the Sunday meal, the festival that turns the world upside down for a day. Even now, we keep pieces of those rhythms without knowing their names. Some nights, when you switch off a lamp, you might still hear a fragment of that old curfew bell in your own silence. When you share a meal, you honor a baker's dozen without thinking. When you pause before speaking, you follow the monk's vow of silence without meaning to. The laws of history linger quietly in us. There's a story from a small English parish that captures this truth. Long after curfews were abolished, the bell ringer of the village still tolled the evening bell. When asked why, he smiled and said, "Because somewhere, someone will sleep easier for hearing it. That, perhaps, is the heart of it all, rules meant not to bind, but to soothe." Now, as the mist thins, the landscape opens wide again. The hills roll like folded blankets. The rivers glitter. The roads stretch endlessly toward other lives. It's easy to think the people of that age were different from us, smaller, slower, frightened. But listen closer. Beneath the robes and armor, the parchment and stone, their worries were our own. Safety, love, rest, meaning. They built their strange laws like lullabies for the world, imperfect, but tender attempts to remind themselves that they were part of something ordered, something merciful. And as the day brightens, the monks begin their chant. the same words whispered for centuries. Pax vobiscum, peace be with you. The sound rolls through the air like a sigh, settling softly over fields and rooftops, over bread ovens and empty streets, over every sleeper who has not yet woken. Peace was always the goal. Every rule, every ritual, every bell. All of it a long conversation with fear, answered gently with structure. So as this story nears its end, take one slow breath with them. Feel the rhythm of that ancient peace. The same breath that warmed barns, filled cloisters, moved through courts and dreams. The same breath that moves through you now. And somewhere, far off in the haze, the bell rings again. Once, twice, 3 times. Fading, fading, until all that remains is quiet. There's something grounding about that scent. Isn't there? In every century, in every corner of the world, the smell of bread is home. But in medieval England, that scent came with rules. Laws so strict that even the humble baker's oven was watched by the crown. It was called the Assize of Bread and Ale, passed in the year 1266 under King Henry III. The sun is higher now, though the air still carries a trace of night. The last bell fades into silence, and the world feels suspended. That gentle, golden pause before the day truly begins. The cobblestones are drying. The smoke from the hearths rises straight and thin, and somewhere a baker hums under his breath. The village, the fields, the abbey, the castle, all the lives we've wandered through, are waking in their rhythm once more. Feels different this time.
Kvita, Kinder.
As though every rule, every habit, every breath we've met along the way has slowed itself to match the heartbeat of morning. The laws we've followed through this night, of silence and firelight, of bread and laughter, of vows, of kings, of sleep, they were never just curiosities of history. They were the architecture of calm. 1,000 tiny promises that life, however uncertain, could still make sense if it followed a pattern. And now, here you are, in the hush after all those patterns. Maybe your body has grown heavier, your thoughts slower. Maybe you can still smell the smoke of those distant fires, hear the echo of those bells, see the glimmer of dawn through the mist. Let it all drift together. The towns, the fields, the abbey halls, the laughter of the fools, the murmur of monks, the whisper of dreams, until it becomes one soft landscape, timeless and safe. You've walked through centuries tonight. You've stood in the chill silence of curfew, tasted warm bread in a baker's shop, watched the harvest gleam under a low sun, knelt beside monks who spoke in gestures instead of words. You've wandered among kings and shadows, and ended here, beneath a sky of morning light. All the strange rules of that old world, they were, in truth, lullabies for living. The bell that told them when to sleep, the prayer that told them how to dream, the harvest that taught them how to give, the vow that reminded them to keep faith even when no one was watching. And perhaps that's the quiet secret of history, that every law, no matter how odd, was really a story of care. People making shapes against the chaos, marking time so that their children might sleep without fear. The same stars that watched over their nights still hang above ours. The same wind still hums through fields where their ghosts might wander, content. The same need for rhythm, for safety, for belonging, still beats in every one of us. You can almost see it, the candlelit room, the window cracked open to morning, the thin curtain breathing gently with the wind. Outside, the world turns softly. Inside, peace lingers. The idea was simple enough on parchment. Protect people from being cheated. Flour was precious, wheat sometimes scarce, and the weight of a loaf could decide whether a family ate or starved. So the law decreed exactly how heavy a loaf of bread must be for a given price, down to the ounce. Too light, and the baker could be fined, shamed, or locked in the pillory, that wooden frame where offenders stood for all to see. And as you lie here, listening, maybe you feel it too. That small pulse of continuity. The old world never really left. It just quieted down. Its bells became our clocks. Its curfews our rest. Its dreams our stories. Take a slow breath now. Let it move through you, easy and unhurried. The body remembers rhythm just as the heart remembers kindness. In this stillness, the past and the present overlap. The medieval night and your own night blur until they are one. The the same calm darkness that holds every sleeper gently. The monks used to say that sleep was the soul's rehearsal for heaven, that the peace we find in dreams is a promise, not an illusion. I think they were right, for what else could peace be, if not this feeling now, of being safe, of having nothing left to prove, of hearing the soft world breathe with you. May you keep that peace as you drift further into rest. And if this quiet journey helped you unwind, if the weight of history lulled you, or the hum of its small, kind rules eased your thoughts, you can always return here, any night you wish. You can join us again where the bells toll, the bread bakes, and the fire burns low. If it feels right, you can leave a small token of that, a like, a quiet word, a whispered thank you, to keep the rhythm alive. But for now, just rest. Let the candle fade. Let the last sound be your own breath, steady and slow. The world has always been waiting for this, for you to be still, to be safe, to dream. Peace be with you, friend. Until next time. Sleep well, and may the laws of kindness and calm keep watch over you through the night. Good night, travelers of time. May your dreams be gentle, and your rest be deep. Imagine that for a moment. Baking not just as craft but as law. The baker rises before dawn, his hands dusted white, his breath misting in the cool air. He kneads dough by candlelight, listening for the faint whistle of wind through the shutters. He's done this every day of his life, and yet, if his loaf weighs even a fraction too little, he's broken the king's decree. To keep their customers safe and their heads unbowed, bakers developed a charming trick. They'd toss in one extra roll, a little bonus piece of bread, just to be certain they weren't shorting anyone. That's where we get the phrase a baker's dozen, 13 for the price of 12. A law turned kindness baked right into habit. Picture it now, the wooden shelves stacked high with golden loaves, crusts cracking gently as they cool. A boy runs errands for his mother, clutching a basket lined with cloth. The baker slides one extra roll inside, pretending not to notice the boy's grin. That small gesture became its own quiet rebellion against the fear of punishment, generosity disguised as compliance. But there's another side to this story, a softer one. The assize of bread and ale didn't just measure loaves, it measured trust. It made sure that the poor could taste fairness at least once a day. Because when the bell of morning rang and the markets opened, everyone, peasant and priest alike, shared the same bread, priced by the same rule. The law was rigid, yes, but within that rigidity was equality, and that was rare in the Middle Ages. Let's linger on that thought for a moment. The idea that something as simple as bread could unite a whole town. Even the aroma itself was a kind of clock, telling people when to rise, when to eat, when to pray. The baker's oven was the village's heartbeat, slow and steady, always warm. Now imagine sitting by that oven. The flames flicker orange and blue, licking at the stone. You can hear the soft pop of air escaping from a crust. The baker hums to himself, a song half forgotten, maybe taught by his father. He wipes sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and checks each loaf with a practiced tap. Hollow sound means ready. Too dense, and it needs a few more minutes of patience. The air is thick with flour dust, floating like snow in the sunbeams that slant through the window. Outside, the town stirs, the same town that was silent under the curfew just hours before. The two laws, night and morning, balance each other perfectly. Silence to keep them safe, bread to keep them strong. And if you close your eyes now, you might almost smell it, that deep, toasty fragrance that feels like safety itself. Maybe it reminds you of your own kitchen, the sound of toast popping or a kettle sighing in the background. History, after all, isn't so distant. The same comforts we crave were once bound by law and fire, just as we are bound by habit and memory. A small bell rings from the church tower, marking the hour. The baker removes the last loaf, brushes flour from his sleeves, and opens his door to the street. The villagers approach in gentle murmurs, exchanging coins for warmth. For a few minutes, everyone smiles. The law of bread has done its job not through punishment, but through predictability. Strange, isn't it? How a rule about ounces and pence could become a ritual of care. The bakers may have feared the stocks, but their extra roll, that 13th loaf, became a gift of peace. Now, as the morning stretches into day and the scent fades into sunlight, the story carries us onward. There's another law waiting, far to the north, where the wind smells of salt and the sea hums low against the cliffs. A law about fish of all things, one that forced even the noblest lords to eat simply, and one that, in its own peculiar way, made perfect sense. The air shifts as we travel north now, from the warm, yeasty hum of the baker's shop to the salt-bright wind of a coastal town in 14th century England. Picture narrow streets that smell of brine and tar, gulls wheeling overhead, and the steady knock of masts against the harbor wall. Fishermen mend their nets by lamplight, hands red and cracked from cold water. Their world is ruled by tides, by weather, and, oddly enough, by law. For centuries, the church held a curious power over what people ate. On certain days of the week, Wednesdays, Fridays, and during Lent, meat was forbidden. The rule came from faith, but it shaped the entire rhythm of life. People called them fish days. It sounds simple now, but in an age before refrigeration, such rules were both blessing and burden. They kept herds alive through winter, supported fishermen's livelihoods, and, as many medieval scholars later wrote, purged the body of heat and sin. Whatever that might have meant to someone staring at a plate of cold herring in February. Imagine being a farmer inland, though nowhere near a coast. The law still applied to you. So barrels of salted cod and pickled herring traveled miles on creaking carts, clattering over cobbled roads, arriving in market squares where buyers sniffed the brine and haggled under their breath. A strange sight, whole towns smelling of sea though the nearest wave was days away. To us it might seem inconvenient, maybe even absurd. Why not just eat what you please? But to them, the rhythm of fish days meant fairness. Everyone shared the same restraint. Rich lords might dine on salmon glazed with herbs, while peasants simmered eels in clay pots. Yet all obeyed the same calendar. The law wasn't about denying pleasure. It was about pacing it, keeping humility alive in the midst of hunger and harvest. And there's a softer side to it, too. Picture the harbor at dawn on a Friday. The sky is a gray shell just beginning to pink at the edges. Nets shimmer with droplets. Boats creak like old bones. Fishermen pull in their catch, laughing through chattering teeth. Somewhere, a church bell rings. Not for curfew this time, but for morning mass. The smell of the sea becomes prayer. One old story tells of a lord who refused to honor the fish day rule. He ordered roasted goose on a Friday and was soon visited, legend says, by a phantom fish that thrashed from his table and drenched him head to toe. It's almost certainly a tale invented by a bored monk, but it captures something true. The idea that even the powerful were meant to bend before custom. The law of fish was a law of humility. Now, close your eyes and picture that coastline at dusk. Lanterns bob like fireflies across the water. The market stalls are closing, their wooden shutters creaking. Somewhere a boy licks salt from his fingers after sneaking a bit of dried cod. His mother laughs softly, shaking her head. The smell of smoke and seaweed curls together in the wind. That, too, was peace, a law that taught patience through appetite, rhythm through repetition. A world where food itself had a heartbeat that matched the tide. And as the waves lap quietly against the shore, the pattern of these strange medieval laws begins to form. Each one, in its own way, was a shape of care. Curfews for safety, bread weights for fairness, fish days for humility. What we call control, they called harmony. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The low hum of 1,000 small rules weaving through daily life, steady and predictable. In a time when the world was fragile, fires common, famine closer than comfort, these rules built a rhythm that people could rest inside. The bell for nightfall would ring again soon. The fires would be covered, the loaves stored, the fish salted for tomorrow. And the sea, timeless as ever, would sing the same slow song beneath the moon. Take another deep breath now, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Let the salt air fill your lungs for a moment, then fade. The day has ended. The curfew waits to fall again. And as we leave that harbor behind, our next story drifts inland, towards something more peculiar still. A law not of silence or bread or fish, but of fashion. In the next chapter, we'll wander through the candlelit halls of medieval courts, where the color of your sleeve or the sparkle of a button could decide your fate. So, rest for a heartbeat longer under the echo of the waves. The sea will keep whispering while we go. The air feels different here, softer, perfumed with beeswax and lavender oil. The year is 1363, and we find ourselves inside the grand hall of an English manor, long before sunrise. Tapestries ripple slightly in the draft from the corridor, and a faint scent of roasting meat lingers from the night before. Outside, frost clings to the garden walls, but inside, the fire burns low and steady. At the high table sits a man of rank, not a king, but near enough. He wears a velvet tunic dyed deep crimson, trimmed with fur. Each thread catches the light like a drop of wine. Yet what he doesn't know, or perhaps pretends not to know, is that he's breaking the law just by wearing it. In the Middle Ages, even your clothes were regulated by decree. These were the sumptuary laws, the strangest blend of fashion advice and royal command ever written. They dictated what color you could wear, what fabric you could afford, even what kind of fur was permitted at your station in life. To us, it sounds absurd, a government of wardrobes, but to them it was as natural as paying taxes. Imagine that for a moment. Choosing an outfit wasn't an act of taste. It was an act of obedience. Silk and scarlet were for nobility only. Merchants could wear fine wool, but not velvet. Peasants were to dress in undyed cloth, the color of raw sheep's wool or flax. Humble tones of cream, brown, and gray. Each thread carried a message, a rank, a boundary you couldn't cross. But why? Why such fuss over fabric? The reasoning was practical on the surface. Imported dyes like Tyrian purple or crimson madder were costly. The laws prevented commoners from bankrupting themselves trying to imitate the upper class. Yet deeper down, it was about order, visible hierarchy. When you saw someone in blue silk, you knew your place in the great tapestry of society. Let's take a quiet walk through the market streets of that same year. Picture stalls covered with bolts of cloth, shimmering in the morning light. The weavers call out prices. The dyers show off vats of indigo that stain their fingers dark as ink. Nearby, a tailor squints at his needle, murmuring prayers that the color of thread he's chosen won't offend the crown. Because the lawmen visit sometimes, measuring sleeves, weighing lace, peering at buttons with the suspicion of priests hunting sin. And yet, there's mischief in the air too. Not everyone obeyed. People always find ways to bend the rules, don't they? A merchant's wife might line her sleeves with a secret strip of silk hidden under wool, visible only when she moves her arm. A shoemaker might dye his laces faintly crimson, not bright enough to draw complaint, but bold enough to make him feel grand. These tiny rebellions shimmered like sparks under the heavy blanket of law. You can almost imagine the whispers at a feast. Did you see her cuffs? That's Venetian velvet. Surely not. Her husband's only a brewer. Gossip in those candlelit rooms was a weapon sharper than any sword. Because in the court of fashion, envy could destroy a reputation faster than treason. But there's one figure we must meet. A young woman named Eleanor, a seamstress who lives by the Thames. Her fingers are nimble, her eyes sharp. By day, she mends garments for merchants. By night, she dreams of color. One evening, after her candles burn low, she dares to stitch herself a dress from scraps. Fragments of crimson velvet, navy brocade, and cream silk. When she wears it just once to a festival, the crowd gasps. Not in scorn, but awe. She looks like royalty. For one night, she feels the weight of silk on her skin, the way the fabric hums when she moves, the way the air changes around her. But the next morning, a constable finds her, and she's fined more than she earns in a month. The dress is taken, and she returns to her gray smock. Still, she smiles when she remembers the feel of that velvet. Sometimes, even a crime can be worth the warmth it leaves behind. The sumptuary laws survived for centuries. Kings and queens revised them again and again, believing they could legislate pride itself. Yet the truth was gentler. The more they forbade beauty, the more people found quiet ways to reclaim it. If you close your eyes, you might even picture the sound of it. The rustle of forbidden silk, the whisper of fabric brushing across stone floors. That's the heartbeat of rebellion, soft, steady, human. Now the fire in the great hall burns lower. The nobleman in crimson sighs, unaware that his very comfort is treason to the cloth. Outside, the frost thickens, and a servant stirs the embers. Somewhere in that quiet glow, a new kind of law is being born, not of color, but of sound, one that would decide how loudly a person could live. The dawn creeps in pale and slow over the city roofs. The nobleman's crimson robe is folded away, the hall silent except for the faint crackle of the fire. But outside, the world is stirring, vendors setting up stalls, dogs barking at shadows, the metallic clang of buckets on cobblestone. In the heart of medieval London, noise was life itself. And yet, even that was subject to law. It seems strange, doesn't it, to imagine a world where laughter, footsteps, or song could be policed. But in many towns, they were. From the 12th century onward, certain cities enforced what they called peace hours. After sunset, shouting was banned, doors were to be closed softly, and no singing or whistling was allowed in the streets. The goal was simple: protect the fragile rest of those who rose before dawn. But in practice, it created an entire soundscape of restraint. Picture it: the glow of torches fading as curfew nears, voices lowering one by one. The market square empties, leaving behind the smell of crushed herbs and tallow smoke. A single lute string plucks somewhere in the distance, then stops. The silence feels thick, as if the whole town is holding its breath. These noise laws weren't always gentle. Some towns fined people for shouting after dark, others for letting animals bray too close to the city walls. In 1388, a French decree even forbade blacksmiths from hammering past certain hours, not because the work was sinful, but because the clanging disturbed the noble's dreams. And so, entire professions learned to listen to the rhythm of law before the rhythm of life. But there's something oddly beautiful about that, isn't there? The idea that the night was shared, like a great woven blanket. When one person broke the quiet, it wasn't just an annoyance. It was a small tear in the peace everyone relied on. The world back then was louder in daylight. The cries of peddlers, the bells of donkeys, the murmur of church songs carried through open doors. So when silence came, it was sacred. And yet, as always, there were exceptions. Festivals, for instance, turned every rule upside down. On feast days, the same nobles who fined their neighbors for noise would dance barefoot in the street to drums and pipes. The air would fill with laughter, horns, and wild song. The laws paused for joy, and for a single night, the city roared with life again. That rhythm, repression, and release was the heartbeat of medieval existence. They lived by rules that hemmed them in, but they found ways to stretch against the edges, like candlelight slipping through the cracks of a shutter. I like to imagine one street in particular, narrow, crooked, paved with uneven stones. A cooper's shop on one end, a tavern on the other. At night, when the last curfew bell fades, a young musician, maybe named Rowan, sits by his window with a wooden flute. He doesn't dare play loudly, but he hums to himself, soft enough that only the wind might hear. The tune is borrowed from the day's market songs, but slower, sadder, like the echo of something lost. Down below, an old woman hears him through her shutters. She doesn't complain. She smiles into the dark, letting the faint melody drift through her dreams. Technically, he's breaking the law, but no one punishes him. Some rules, it seems, are meant to be bent just enough to remind us that we're still alive. You can almost hear it now, that soft breath of the flute, carried across the sleeping city. The tone wavers, a single note trembling like a candle flame, then silence again. What's strange is how similar those medieval sound laws feel to modern life. We call them noise ordinances now, but the idea's the same. Find balance between community and chaos, rest and revelry. The past lingers quietly beneath every siren and curfew, whispering, "Remember the silence that kept us safe." As the morning unfolds, the city begins its chorus once more. Blacksmiths resume their hammers, carts clatter on the stones, and merchants call out over one another in bright, familiar chaos. It's as though the night has exhaled, releasing all it held in. And perhaps that was the point. The laws of color, the laws of sound, they weren't about punishment so much as pacing. They gave life its rhythm, a rise and fall, like breath. Now, as the first sunlight spills over the rooftops, let's follow it into another realm of rule and ritual, the medieval feast where even gluttony had guidelines, and the number of bites you could take was written in etiquette as strictly as law. The air is warm again, heavy with spice and smoke. We've left the city streets behind and stepped into a great stone hall draped in banners of gold and blue. Torches sputter along the walls, and the smell of roasted meats, honeyed wine, and fresh herbs fills the air. Long wooden tables stretch from end to end, polished smooth by centuries of elbows and tankards. Tonight is a feast, and in the Middle Ages, a feast was as much about rules as it was about revelry. Picture the scene. At the high table, a lord and lady sit on carved chairs that gleam with candlelight. Below them, rows of guests chatter softly, each according to rank. A minstrel tunes his lute by the fire. A hound curls beneath the bench, dreaming of scraps. Servants move like shadows between the tables, pouring ale into pewter mugs, setting down trenchers, flat slabs of day-old bread that serve as plates. It looks joyful, but beneath that warmth lies a web of careful ritual. For instance, did you know that in many noble courts, even how you chewed was dictated by custom? A guest must not take a bite larger than a hazelnut. No elbows on the table, no scratching, no wiping your mouth on your sleeve. Every gesture was a thread in the tapestry of manners, a reflection of the hierarchy that ruled every other part of life. And the strangest part? These rules were enforced almost like law. Violating table etiquette could mean losing your place at court or your patron's favor. It wasn't written in parchment or signed by kings, but in the medieval mind, shame was its own punishment. Imagine the hum of voices as the meal begins. The servants bring out the first course, maybe pottage, a thick stew of barley and vegetables. Steam curls upward, catching the torchlight in golden swirls. Everyone waits. No one touches their spoon until the Lord has taken the first bite. Only then do the others lift their own, in perfect, silent unison. There's a rhythm to it all, like the quiet choreography of a dream. Between courses, jugs of spiced wine are passed, but never poured directly into one's own cup. That would be greedy. Instead, you pour for your neighbor and he for you, a small reminder that even at the table of plenty, humility is law. Now let's listen to the sounds. The soft scrape of knives against bread trenchers, the murmur of conversation, the faint buzz of a fly daring too close to the honey dish. Someone laughs, too loudly perhaps, and heads turn. The steward's raised eyebrow says enough. Remember your place. The idea behind these countless small rules wasn't cruelty. It was balance, a way of turning eating, that most basic of human needs, into something elevated, almost sacred. In an uncertain world, ritual brought order. And in that order, people found comfort. But even here, where law and table met, mischief found its way in. There's a story of a squire, nameless now, who decided one evening to test the patience of his host. He deliberately slurped his soup, let his hound lick the bones, and toasted himself instead of his neighbor. The room went still. The lady of the house, known for her wit, simply smiled and said, "When pigs dine as men, it's time to change the trough." The hall erupted in laughter, and the lesson was made without a single penalty. You see, even in discipline, there was humor. That's what made the medieval world so strangely human. They lived by rules that would make us laugh today, but they understood that laughter itself was part of keeping peace. Now, as the feast winds down, the trenchers are collected and tossed to the poor waiting by the door. Musicians play softly, a harp, a drum, a voice singing in a language nearly lost. The guests lean back, bellies full, faces warm with wine.